Hi, my dearest family. I hope you are excited about the entry of Uranus into the sign of Gemini. Today, we are going to be talking about that a little bit. Yes, I have made a few videos about it last year. You can find them on my YouTube channel. But today, I wanted to give you a bit of a summary, how this might be playing out in the world. So it should be a exciting little lecture here. But also, I would like to invite you to check out, for example, my upcoming webinar, which is going to be about maltreatment. Now, maltreatment is about pretty much your bad planets. And often we tend to believe that the bad planets are going to be Saturn and Mars, but it's not always the case. So most students of astrology can identify a good or a bad planet, but very few understand the functional mechanics of how a planet actually performs. We often see a well-placed planet fail to deliver, or a debilitated planet produce massive success. So the secret can lie in maltreatment and bonifications. These are the specific conditions that determine whether a planet is being bullied or blocked or supported and elevated by its peers. So I made two webinars the last couple of weeks about bonification. The reason why we did a second class was because the students did enjoy it. Secondly, we wanted to do a bit of a practice. So now we are going to be focusing on the most difficult planet of your chart. So if that's something that is in interest to you, then you can check out it. You can check it out on my website, or you can even decide that you join my membership program, and then you can watch as many webinars and courses available on my website as many times as you wish so. Now, let's get into this Gemini, Uranus in Gemini business. Obviously, it is a big shift, right? And it's going to be happening on the 26th of April, 2026. So, of course, we need to be ready for it. So that's why I decided to do it almost a month earlier. This is a massive shift. While Uranus has been kind of like going through Taurus since 2018, dealing with, these slow-moving earthy themes like banking, agriculture, physical security. Its entry into Gemini on April 26, 2026, completely flips the script, and it's going to speed up. Uranus is the planet of lightning strikes, and Gemini is the sign of the mind and the message. When they merge, the pace of life doesn't speed up, it becomes very electric. Trust me on that. Of course, Gemini is considered to be a fast sign, and Uranus is famous for its own speed as well. So in Gemini, Uranus shatters centralized information. So it really feels like we are moving from big media to these hyper local, hyper personal type of like data. Because Gemini rules the nervous system, Uranus is the planet of electricity. It looks like it's like the nervous system, the collective nervous system is getting an upgrade. This often manifests as anxiety or restlessness if we don't have a way to ground, the influx of new information and the situations around us. If Taurus was about what we own, such as like crypto, land, gold, your material possessions, Gemini is about how we trade it and talk about it. The Internet of Things becomes the Internet of everything. So obviously, Internet might be restructured and it's going to be central part of our lives. Now, this is a 7-year cycle. So the predictions that I'm making is not necessarily for a day or two. This is going to be between 2026 to 2033. And it really feels like that it completely redefines the human element of technology. So, like the neural interfacing, for example, I think we are going to be seeing the first mainstream of brain computer interfaces. Language will no longer be limited to speech or text. It's kind of like the thought sharing, or language is not going to be a barrier between two people anymore. It's just going to be a lot easier. You just talk and then something automatically translates. I know some of these things are existing already, but imagine this as, rapidly improving. It's surely the AI revolution 2.0. I mean, while Uranus was in the sign of Taurus, AI started, right? But it was more of a tool for productivity. In Gemini, it becomes a partner in dialogue. We won't just use AI, we will kind of co-think with it. So I know many of you might not like the idea of this, but to be frank, this is the reality. Let's just put it that way. I feel like education is going to be reformed as well. I think the traditional classroom, which is a little bit like a Taurus structure, Taurus has got Moon as its exalted ruler. So Taurus is a very traditional sign overall. It's fixed, it's physical. So, of course, we needed these classrooms. I think Uranus in Gemini decentralizes this, and we are going to be talking about micro learnings, peer-to-peer education, and kind of like specialized skill bursts, replacing these type of long-term degrees. So, what I'm pretty much thinking is that, you are going to be learning more skills and maybe you get credit for them rather than, okay, you're going to become, let's say, just a doctor and then you're going to study something for 5, 6, 7 years and so forth. Of course, I would like to mention that history shows that Uranus in Gemini is rarely quiet. It has a very specific coloration with major conflicts that redefines borders and ideas. But I'm going to be, of course, talking to you about the previous cycles as well, so that you will be able to compare. But of course, the last 5 cycles of Uranus in Gemini were always about wars. But I don't think it's just about wars. There are periods where the way humanity connects is kind of like violently torn down and then rebuilt. So I think if Taurus was about, because Taurus is about money, and crypto, for example, became quite an asset. I think the Gemini element is going to be about digital currency and kind of like having a social credit. Taurus can talk to us about work-related matters as well, because this is an earth sign. And Uranus in Taurus already started the remote work. So it really feels like that the physical location is slowly, but it's going to start disappearing basically. And I'm imagining this fractional work, many small gigs or roles at once. You know, um, Gemini rules travel as well. So electric cars started appearing during the Uranus in Taurus period. So I'm imagining more short distance flights, drones, and certain type of pods coming up. And even with Uranus in the sign of Taurus, we started seeing communities being built and tribes kind of like forming. It really feels like while Uranus will be in the sign of Gemini, there is going to be these tribes, and the trading between tribes are going to become very significant. I think if you think of Taurus, which is a physical storage of value, we are moving to the velocity of exchange. So if Taurus was your vault, your wallet, Gemini is kind of like the market square. So I have got the goods and I'm going to take it to the market and I'm going to kind of sell it. So it really feel while with Uranus in the sign of Taurus, it did matter what you had or what you had. I think now what's gonna matter is how fast you can move it, market it, or monetize the information surrounding it. So I'm gonna give you some ideas how I'm imagining this, but imagine that, for example, 5 years ago, I created a 20-hour long course. It feels like people will not be interested in courses anymore. They will want more short, like 1 hour webinars because maybe they don't have the time for 20-hour courses and stuff like that. So remember that Uranus in Taurus is very much about our physical assets. Now the asset is going to be the data, the IP, the pretty much these social capitals. While with Uranus in the sign of Taurus, we bought things because it lasts and it holds value. I think this time around it's going to be more to do with buy this because it connects you or gives you an edge right now, but it won't last kind of like forever. So while we started the digital wallets and these QR codes with Uranus in the sign of Taurus, I believe that this is a little bit more of a microtransactions type of, like the bartering type of matters that we are going to be seeing with Uranus in the sign of Gemini. Or, in the Uranus and in Uranus in the sign of Taurus, because Taurus is about assets and that needs logistics. And with Uranus in Taurus, we started rebuilding global shipping and warehouses. I'm pretty much imagining that, for example, there's going to be a lot of 3D printing happening on sites, or, the deliveries are going to be a lot shorter somehow. So there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be fastened, basically. Like I said, in the Taurus era, if I sold a 10-hour course as a single product, because this is a thing that you own, in the Gemini era, this is going to be breaking that course into 100 micro insights and then maybe selling it via subscription or paper thought type of model. The trade isn't a one-time transaction, it's a constant stream of short form exchanges. So it feels like that selling is going to become more of a conversation rather than just a sales pitch. Uranus in Gemini rules local networking. So we will likely see a massive surge in decentralized marketplaces. So instead of a central platform taking, I don't know, a 30% cut, sellers will use kind of smart contracts to trade directly with their neighbors or certain type of niche communities. So how we sell becomes more of a handshake facilitated by code, peer-to-peer handshake type of stuff. Or, while with Uranus in the sign of Taurus, people fought to protect their assets. In Gemini, it really feels like that this is more to do with intellectual properties. So the most successful sellers are potentially going to be those who leak or share information to gain influence. And influence becomes kind of like the primary currency that is then traded for certain type of goods. So that's how I'm pretty much imagining that. Think of Gemini as the sign of currency. So trade is becoming a bit lighter, at least for me. We are kind of like moving away from the heavy logistics, and if you can't sell it digitally or move it via a small fast delivery system, then Uranus in Gemini energy will feel like a bit of a clog, actually. So it really feels like that many of us gonna have to think through how we want to sell something. It also feels like that the sales will happen through multi-channel platforms simultaneously. So you aren't just selling something on your website, you are selling it via a chat, a video, or maybe I'm going to partner up with you and then I'm going to ask you if you can sell my courses and stuff like that on your webinar, or you're going to do something like that with me as well. So it really feels like that people are going to be collaborating more. This is asking you to be mentally more flexible. It really feels like that the most successful traders won't be the ones with the most capital, but the ones who can pivot their messages the fastest, because the market will change daily. I mean, when I'm talking about market, I'm not just talking about, day trading and stuff like that. I'm talking about this market pool where you choose your products from. Now, when Uranus hits Gemini, some specific fields, I think, going to go through a transformation as well. So Gemini rules cars and transportation. So I feel like we are moving away from the status to more of a smart type of category. Because in the sign of Taurus, the car was a physical asset. Kind of like having the engine or the brand was important. It really feels like that in the sign of Gemini, a car is going to become this mobile communication device, basically. So somehow I'm expecting the rise of V2Vs, vehicle to vehicle communication, for example, or I can imagine cars will be able to talk to each other to kind of avoid traffic. And maybe this is also about not necessarily owning a car, but maybe you subscribe to kind of like a system where, I don't know, you pay a monthly fee and then you can use the car as much as you want, or you pay it by mileage rather than renting a car, let's say for 5 days, maybe you can park it anywhere and something like that. Obviously, I'm going a bit crazy with these predictions, but I'm very curious to hear how you think the world is going to be changing with Uranus in the sign of Gemini. Now, Gemini is also a representation of your local environment and your neighborhoods as well. Gemini rules your immediate surroundings. So Uranus often shatters things. So I think Uranus here shatters the isolated kind of like suburban model. I think neighborhoods will start creating their own decentralized power. Instead of buying, let's say, electricity from a massive corporation, maybe you trade excess solar power with your neighbor across the street. So again, this peer-to-peer model that I'm kind of like focusing on here, or Gemini represents travel and also neighboring countries as well. So I feel like neighboring countries will kind of gather together and then they're gonna start sharing goods. So instead of, I don't know, I'm gonna get oil from, I don't know, Kazakhstan, for example, I'm going to be getting my oil from the neighbor and I'm gonna give them potatoes instead. Obviously, potato and electricity and stuff like that are not comparable, but just go with the flow. This is just a bit of a crazy idea. I think we should be expecting a boom in air taxis or these short-range electric planes connecting neighboring cities. Or even I can imagine these cable cars somehow getting more and more popular. Maybe we're gonna see these short-range electric planes or, connecting, like what I'm thinking of is, for example, the route between London to Paris. We have got that fast train, which is about, what, 2.5 hours long. So I can imagine these fast trains becoming a bigger hit or something to do between state to state. Or maybe I can imagine crossing the border is going to become a digital handshake. So the physical passport might be replaced completely by biometric kind of fast passes that allow you to move between neighboring countries as easily as walking into a different room, for example. Gemini represents studying and education as well. Gemini is typically more to do with the primary education, though. So I think we're gonna start seeing this micro credentialing instead of like, why to spend 4 years on one degree when you can get 50 kind of skill badges in 6 months? So it really feels like that education is going to become more modular and more kind of like on demand. I think students are going to be partnered up with AI tutors. I think that's going to become the future. Every student gets a personalized AI-driven kind of twin that understands exactly how their brain processes information. And on one hand, of course, it sounds super scary. I get that. But on the other hand, this would be about, making the most out of the particular student. Why? Because everyone has got different learning styles. It really feels like students will not go to a school building. Maybe they enter this VR study hub place where they learn a language by speaking it with AI avatars, in kind of like in a stimulated environment. Gemini rules languages and speech as well. So I think this is perhaps the most Uranian shift. Gemini is how we translate thought into sounds. So real-time translation, I think it's going to happen there. I think, like I said, it has already been happening, but it becomes standard. So you speak in English, the person next to you hears it in their native tongue instantly, most likely via an earpiece. Or maybe we're gonna start seeing the beginning of synthetic telepathy, using tech to transmit thoughts or intentions without speaking. Sounds super scary, to be frank. Imagine that we have got a business meeting where four people speak four different languages, yet the trade happens in real time because the tech bridges these linguistic gaps instantly between two people. Now, of course, Uranus represents disruption as well, or shock. So this is going to become very shocking for many of us. I feel like there's going to be a disruption or to ownerships, you know. I think there's going to be disruptions to isolation or disruptions between neighboring countries as well, though. And the shift is not going to be as easy. But surely the next 7 years is highly technological, not just because of Uranus being in the sign of Gemini, but Pluto is in the sign of Aquarius as well. Now, let me mention that Gemini is also how we process information, how we think, but it's a dual sign. So duality comes with really good and bad things. I mean, all signs have got their positive and negative side. So, but Gemini is the representation of the good sister and the evil sister. So this is where this transit can get a bit noisy, basically. It doesn't just represent one thought, it represents kind of like the collision of two opposing thoughts. Okay? And then when the planet of rebellion and shock enters kind of like this dual space, all of a sudden the good and the bad uh, aren't pretty much just labels anymore. We are talking about two polarities of the very same kind of like electric event. So it's this something. So whatever Uranus in Gemini is going to bring, it really feels like it's going to divide people. But on one hand, this is about mental rewiring, surely. It's kind of like rebooting the hardware of your brain. So it's about moving from this linear way of thinking, like A leading to B, to more of a network thinking, where everything happens at once. So I think the positive side of Uranus here is about increased mental agility, and maybe you can process multiple streams of data, find patterns between unrelated subjects, download solutions instantly. It's the archetype of inventor, basically. The bad side of it is a bit of a scattered mind because there is so much data. The brain can struggle to focus on one thing, and this could lead to mental exhaustion, kind of like brain fogs from overstimulation. And therefore, it is about shortened attention span. So we might start seeing more people coming up with HD, and so on. Gemini is also about how we process information, and what happens here is about the duality of truth. So, of course, Uranus in Gemini could really talk to us about total transparency and where secrets are harder to keep because information wants to be free and people are going to be leaking information. It can bring a lot of aha moments to people also. But the bad thing is basically the truth decay because Gemini is the trickster. Uranus can amplify these deep fakes, propaganda, the alternative facts. So this duality can manifest as a world where two people can look at the same piece of data and see two different, completely different kind of realities. So hopefully we are not going to be seeing that because there are so many lies out there on the internet already, and I think it needs to be mainstreamed a little bit. Because Jupiter rules the arms, the lungs, the nervous system, and Uranus is very electric. So I can imagine that there's going to be a lot more wittiness happening, a lot more kind of like high-speed communication. So we might see the phones changing completely and so forth. But a lot of jitteriness, a lot of anxiety can come with this as well. It's kind of like when the body feels like it got electrocuted basically by too much mental activity. So I can imagine insomnia becoming a problem, for example. Um, so this is a very short kind of like way of looking at what we might experience with this. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the history. So when Uranus was, for example, in the sign of Gemini between 1774 to 1782, and we had the American Revolutionary War around that time. It wasn't just a physical battle, really. It was the war of words as well. Um, anyway, I don't want to go into that too much, but this era saw the rise of the printed press, for example, as a weapon, and the invention of the steam engine, which would eventually revolutionize the domain of travel. Then we had 1858 to 1866, which was the US Civil War. So, the Gemini is the sign of twins, kind of like the brothers and the sisters. So this is where the duality turned inward and kind of like the house got divided a little bit. So, but we had the telegraph coming up around that time. That was the very first time in human history when the information was able to move a lot faster, faster than a horse, right? So this collapsed distance and changed commerce, journalism, military strategy basically forever. We had the very first transatlantic cable laid as well, exactly in 1858, and then connecting neighbors across the ocean. Then we had 1941 to 1949. That's pretty much the information age is born. But we had the World War II. And it really feels like it was the war of intelligence. But there was the development of radars, code breaking, for example. Computing was one of the innovation. The first general purpose electronic computer was built. Aviation got bigger. Jet engines and mass air travel began to take shape, basically. And then not to mention that there were some global networks like the UN and NATO also was formed as well. So, as you can see, there is a lot of war, but there is a lot of technological improvement that might have happened, during those periods. So we should be expecting something very similar. Now, of course, we had Uranus in Gemini already in 2025, from July 7th to November 7th, on top of my head. So this was a little bit of a dip. Imagine that this is kind of like the trailer for the movie. So the first ingress is usually something that brings a shock or a new idea that arrives, and then retrogrades back into the previous sign, which of course was Taurus for us, because we have got certain type of unfinished businesses of that old era. And now we finished the retrograde period of Uranus. So Uranus is really rushing forward to get into the sign of Gemini. So the countdown has started. And the permanent entry of Uranus into the sign of Gemini is happening on the 26th of April. So think back what went down in your life according to your house position in your chart between July to November 2025 because the permanent phase is coming up. We did see a sudden burst of new tech, specific news story about decentralized communication, the glitches we started seeing, how we trade, how we travel. So surely that's going to be somehow changing. I mean, imagine, for example, that we have got a company that tries a radical AI-driven marketing strategy, right? Or a new peer-to-peer trading model, for example. It is exciting, it is fast, but maybe it was unstable at that time. So we had to go back once we went back into the sign of Taurus to kind of fix the bugs there. And that's between November to April 2026. So we have to go back to the basics, fixing the funding, securing the servers, for example, and so forth, so that we can experience the full launch, which is starting in 2026 April. Okay? So this is how you should be actually thinking about your life as well once Uranus went into the sign of Gemini. What did you experience there? And why you had to return to the sign of Taurus to fix something. So, for example, let's say you're a Pisces rising sign, it triggers your fourth house and then it goes back into your third house. So, by the way, I'm going to be doing a complete breakdown for all 12 signs as well. Which is going to be available for my membership guys. You can check that out on my website. And it's also going to be available on my YouTube channel membership as well. But that only comes with lunation reports, as well as this time around, I'm going to be making this bonus system or bonus lecture as well. I think each rising sign I'm going to talk about at least about a good 15 minutes. So I might be doing it in two parts. So if that's in your interest, check that out. So I hope this video helps you prepare what's about to come. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and all those goodies. And see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.